background about why we're here this evening. Well, we're glad you are. And it kind of goes back a little over a month ago when Canada Post and the current CEO of Canada Post, Deepak Chopra, announced a 5-point business plan. And like Canadians, the Canadian Postal Workers, the bargaining agent, the union represents about 50,000 workers at Canada Post, learned about that business plan about an hour before the rest of Canada did. And in that business plan, there were some devastating projects that Canada Post wants to implement over the next 5 years, all of which we think are detrimental to Canada Post as a public entity. And so we, as a union, talked to our locals in Atlantic Canada. We have about 35 locals in Atlantic Canada. And we thought it was important to get together to talk about those announcements, about what we can do to work with our allies, work with the community to fight back. Because the last time there was the public had an input into Canada Post, certainly wasn't the case this time. There was no public input. Canada Post went around the country and said they met in 46 locations. Well, they met in secret. They didn't invite the public. They didn't ask for your input. So we want to be able to strategize about how we get our message heard so that Canadians do have a say about what their post office looks like in the future. And we realize as a union that there is declining mail volume, there is declining letter mail volumes. That's a reality. That's been a reality since Canada Post wanted to invest about $2 billion in a modern post campaign that involved buying new letter sorting machines. So this has been ongoing for a while, but it can't be about cutting service to Canadians and then cutting core services to Canadians. We have been talking to Canada Post and pushing them about implementing new initiatives that will bring in new revenues, sorely needed revenues for Canada Post to keep us making money like we have in 17 of the past 18 years, making profits for Canada Post, paying over $1.5 billion in taxes and dividends back to the federal government.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Earlier today, we were told via a video that we watched, a 3-minute video, that we can't do a facto lunch. I think we had to avoid, sort of just shoving out facts and figures and numbers, etc., and instead sort of deal with issues and talk about issues. So I'm going to try to do that, but I will leave the facts to you to review when you go through this document, which is a copy of a report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives called "Why Canada Needs Postal Banking." It was published just a few months ago, written by a fantastic researcher named John Anderson, and it's a tremendous document. And so when I say there's a lot of this, well, the real number, the exact number, is always in here. And I'll come back to this in a bit. So what I want to do, instead of looking at a lot of sort of dry statistics, is I want to just deal with these questions. Okay, what do we mean by postal banking? Why are we talking about it, and why is it a bigger issue now? Is it a good idea? And even if it's a good idea, is it a necessary idea? In other words, you can have a good idea, it could be a good idea, but if the banking needs of people in this country are met already, then why do we want the post office to get into that if it's not necessary? Is it practical for the post office to provide banking services? And if all these things, if we answer yes to all those things, what are the implications for the post office and for postal workers? And if we still like the answer to that one, then what do we do? What do we have to do to make this happen? Okay, so what do we mean by postal banking? In most countries, you wouldn't have to ask that. Because almost in every country of the world, postal banking is a reality. In fact, there's 800 million people on this planet that have bank accounts at their post office. 800 million. That's a lot. And so all these postal banks don't look the same. Pretty well, if you look at every country, you see that they have similarities. In other words, you as a citizen can go, take out an account, do your banking, make deposits, make withdrawals. In some cases, in most cases, you have a credit card at the bank, etc., the postal bank. But there's some pretty big differences. In some countries, like New Zealand and France, postal banks are complete banks all of themselves. Whereas they control all the funds that they get in the deposits, they make investments, they make serious loans, and they make serious cash, and they are totally within their own control and their own destiny. In other countries, like Brazil and Italy, postal banks, still very, very large banks, very powerful banks, but they operate in partnership with other banks. In both Brazil and Italy now, they're operating in partnership with other government-owned banks. And then in other countries like the United Kingdom, although this is changing, but in the United Kingdom, the postal bank operates, performs services, if you will, for other banks. So for instance, in the United Kingdom, you can go into any post office and any sub-post office, and you can make deposits and make withdrawals from your account, whether you're part of Barclays or Midland Bank or you name it. 80% of the banks in the United Kingdom are tied in and have arrangements with the post office so that you can perform all your retail business at the post office, no matter what bank you really bank with. So, there's significant different models. So when people talk to us about, sort of what are you looking at in terms of postal banking, our answer right now is actually to say, we're not proposing any one specific structure yet. And there are reasons for that. Firstly, we want to concentrate right now on gaining support for the concept. So we really want to look at these other questions right now. It's not that important to us right now to try to work out what particular type of arrangements we would want to make with either other existing banks in Canada or on a go-it-alone basis. The other thing is, frankly, we want to work with our allies on this. And also we need to do more research. We need to know more about the industry. We need to develop our ideas, and perhaps even more and most importantly, we need to be flexible. Because along the way, and this will happen, along the way we're going to be approached. We might be approached by a big credit union like the Van City Credit Union, or we may be approached by a major national private sector bank who wants to do business through Canada Post. Because one by one, all of these institutions have to start rethinking their previous opposition. And the reason they have to do that is because we're finally getting some really good traction on this issue. But I'll come back to that. So we're not going to say exactly, we're not going to get hung up on sort of saying, well, what precisely are we talking about? What we are serious about, though, is that we want definitely, certainly a minimum amount of banking services that can be performed at postal counters, your usual, and our optimum, our maximum, if you will, desire would be to have a full-scale Canadian postal bank which ran its own operation. That would be by far the best. But whatever, we're very determined that Canadian citizens, all Canadians, should be able to do their banking at a postal bank, take out loans, have a credit card, put money into an RSP. And as we know, that's not the case right now. Not all Canadians, not all people in this country can actually do that at a bank. And I'll come back to that. So why now? Well, I think part of the why now, of course, is, as Geoff said, there's a lot more attention being paid to the post office these days. And part of the, as we know, part of the justification that they're using for these draconian cuts that they are attempting to make, part of the justification that they're using is they're saying Canada Post has no money. We have a big pension problem. We have declining volumes, and the long list of the arguments that they make. And of course, in each one of these cases, when you get into the details of them, you're able to unpack and get to the truth about what the real situation is with Canada Post. But nevertheless, as we know in this room, volumes have been going down, and they're likely to continue to go down. Even though parcels are going up, and there's a good chance that addressed ad mail and unaddressed ad mail will go up. So we're not in any imminent crisis. But nevertheless, the trend against first class or transaction letter mail, as we know it, is a negative one, and it's likely to stay that way. And that has significant implications for the future of postal services, as we know, and for the finances of Canada Post. So when you're faced with a situation like this, what do you do? If you're Deepak Chopra, and you're sitting around and you're saying, well, we have 6,600 facilities in this country. We have more retail facilities than all the banks combined. We have post offices in more than 2,000 communities where there is no bank. So if you're Deepak Chopra, what do? You say, oh, I'm not even going to think of that. And you go somewhere else. But we're not Deepak Chopra. And we have very good reasons to think that faced with the situation that we have now, we have to greatly intensify our efforts around looking at new services and new revenue sources for Canada Post. And this is nothing new. Let's just remember this. This is nothing new. In 1984, and I know that's a long time ago. For me, it was just like yesterday, but I know, like for some of you here, it would be in the past. In 1984, the National Executive Board of the CUPW, after much debate, really shifted its direction and said, okay, we're going to start a plan. We're going to start a campaign, and we're going to call it Job Creation Through Service Expansion. Okay, it was a very sort of radical idea for the CUPW at the time, that as a union, we were really going to put a lot more energies into making sure that there was more services being offered to the people in the country. And you remember, no, you won't, some of you won't remember, I remember, that at that time, you couldn't buy an envelope in a post office. Not for lack of trying. It took us about a decade before you could. But that was because of the lobby of W.H. Smith and Sons and other places that sold stationery, etc. So anyway, at that time, the union decided to do that. And every round of bargaining since then, every single round of bargaining, we've had a demand that at the retail counters, Canada Post should introduce financial services, including banking services. And you can go back and see this. Now this was not, we had other fish to fry, as they would say. I guess you say that a lot in the Atlantic, I don't know. We had other things to fight about. They tried to privatize all the post offices. They contracted out all the parcel delivery. It wasn't, along the way we had a few things to take care of, a little business to take care of. But nevertheless, as part of our bargaining, we always had the perspective of increasing the services at retail. And gradually we saw new direction outlets come in. A person from this region, former national president, Darrell Tingley, he and Catherine Steinhoff, who's still working in our office, they actually were involved in the 1980s with a subcommittee with the top management of Canada Post to redesign the retail. And they got a lot of new services put in there at that time. So this is not a new issue for us, but it's a very important one now, because there is every reason to assume that the finances of Canada Post are not going to be great for a few years. And so we're going to get a lot more attention. And there's basically two options here. One of the options is cut back, reduce expenditure, and the other is increased revenues. And we know which one we want. Because the one that we want also corresponds to the needs of people in this country. So, is it a good idea? Well, other countries certainly seem to think that it's a good idea. And while we've been, basically just sort of having this in the back burner, other countries made a lot of progress. In 1999, the Italians created their postal bank, called Banco Posta. It's a fantastic bank. It's an incredible bank. This bank has taken Italy from being a backward country in terms of financial services, in terms of banking, to an incredibly forward country. And in part because the mandate that was given to it at the time was they wanted to use the postal bank to bring in mobile phones, including introducing financial transactions on the mobile phones. They're way ahead of where we are. And also bank cards to a population that largely didn't have either credit cards and mobile phones. They've done that through the postal bank. It's tremendous. The whole world used to laugh at the Italian post office because periodically they would take all the mail that they hadn't delivered for a few years and they'd burn it. Anyway, nobody laughs at the Italian post office anymore. In 2002, New Zealand decided that they would create a postal bank. 2002. In part, the reason they did this because the big banks in New Zealand wanted to merge. Right? And most of them were owned by actually Australians. They wanted to merge. And so there was a lot of resistance to this merger because people said, well, we're going to lose, if they merge, they're going to cut back on their bank branches, there'll be less competition and that. The government did something rather extraordinary. It said, well, we can create the competition. And we can ensure that there won't be villages and towns that are having no bank in them, because we're going to open up banks in every outlet, every postal outlet. And they created what they call Kiwi Bank. First it was primarily a savings bank. Now it's a full-blown bank. They're doing business loans, they're doing insurance, they're doing you name it. And they have the largest number of branches in the country, and they're doing really well. And it's been a great service to the people. The same year, Brazil in 2002 was planning on this is before the election of the Workers' Party. They had a real right-wing government, terrible government. And they were planning on privatizing the post office. And they decided to establish a postal bank in the post office, which they planned to privatize. And they did it basically for economic reasons, to stimulate growth in isolated communities. There's thousands of towns in Brazil that are basically cut off from most commerce and activity, and that did not have a bank. And of course, if you don't have banking services, and if it takes you a few days to travel to a bank that has one, the chances of getting a loan to start up a small business are very small. Chances of you doing it. So they decided to push through banking services through the post office. The Workers' Party gets elected. They do it they did it as a partnership. So in other words, they took a fairly, if you will, undeveloped banking service postal service, and they overlaid on that a very advanced banking system, because they did it with a private sector partner at the time. They now are operating with a public sector partner. The contract with the private sector ran out after 10 years. They now have 6,000, over 6,000 branches in Brazil. And they've done these amazing studies to show the differences it's made in communities when you started a bank. When all of a sudden people had the ability to get credit and start small businesses. And and you can find that on their website, and you can also find that on websites associated with the United Nations. So other countries, more recently, we had the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. You had a failure of Dexia Bank in Europe. Who picked up the slack for them? It was the French Postal Bank. They dramatically expanded the services of the French Postal Bank. 2012, Swiss Bank, Switzerland. Okay, Switzerland has a very, very dynamic postal bank, but basically they were providing services for other financial institutions. They decided in 2012 they were going to apply for their own license and become their own bank. Same thing is happening in the UK. They did the same. 2013, they opened up a current account and they're just expanding it now. So while we've been sort of like, you know, faintly whispering about this, other countries have been moving on it. So these countries seem to think it's a good idea. Other people from time to time in Canada have thought it's a good idea. Michael Warren was a fellow who was the first president of Canada Post Corporation, right? Post office was converted from a department of government to a crown corporation in 1981. Michael Warren was the first president. He used to go around and make speeches about introducing banking services in the post office. He would make speeches talking about the fact there's 2,000 post offices, communities with post offices and no bank. At that time, the banks opposed him, and the Tories got elected and threw him out. They don't like him. In 2005, a House of Commons report produced by the Economics Division basically looked at this very question and said the status quo is absolutely not on for the post office. This is in 2005. This is when volumes are still going up. This is how smart these people were. They could actually see that in a few years the internet was going to cause volumes to decline. They could project what was happening, and they said in 2005, status quo is not on. Canada Post should look at doing what other countries, because they looked at them, were doing, which is provide financial services through the post office. So that's a report that's available on the internet as well. And then our good friend, our dear departed friend, Moya Green, who many of you will recall fondly, I'm sure. Well, before she went to the UK and got her $1 million salary by privatizing the post office, she actually became a convert to postal banking. And she made a few appearances before a Senate committee in Ottawa, talking about the fact that they had been doing research into it and that they were seriously considering moving ahead. So all that is like the context of this. So a lot of people have thought it was a good idea. Who thinks it's a bad idea? The banks think it's a good idea. They do probably still, but you know, wait, these guys are made of money, and as soon as they figure that it's going to happen anyway, they'll figure some way to make money off it. So, you know. But basically, people that don't like the public sector, they think it's a bad idea. So we see, you know, right-wingers think it's a bad idea, so they think the public sector shouldn't be doing anything. Who else thinks it's a bad idea? Well, Deepak Chopra. He thinks it's a bad idea, and what he says is that Canada Post doesn't have the expertise. Canada Post doesn't have the expertise to get into banking. Well, as I mentioned before, you know, post offices like the Italian post office and the Brazilian post office, they didn't have the expertise either, but they got it. You know, in other words, it shouldn't be an obstacle. But let's take a look at Canada Post. Okay? Now, Canada Post What do banks do? Well, banks take care of the movement of money and the investment of money, primarily. So Canada Post has developed ePost. ePost is one of the most sort of technologically advanced sort of electronic postal systems in the world. And what's it do? It enables you to go on. You get your presentation of bills. You can pay your bills through all this. But they've been pretty good on that. I mean, I don't like it personally, but they actually proved themselves in the market to be very capable of moving from the movement of hard copy paper to electronic funds transfers. Canada Post has done that. They also run one of the largest pension funds in the country, $17 billion worth. And their investment record was pretty lousy at the beginning because they didn't listen to the unions, actually, that made a presentation to them on this. I'm still pissed off about it. But they jumped into the high-tech stuff in 2000 when they started getting all the cash. And of course, they lost a lot at the time. But in recent years, they've done really well. They've done better than, in most years, done better than the rest of the market. So it's not like Canada Post is incapable. I think that Deepak Chopra should, think a bit more highly of his own operation here. And he could also ask himself, well, President's Choice formed a bank. You can get your RSPs through President's Choice now. Walmart formed a bank. They now have their own bank. Now, Canadian Tire formed a bank, but they can do anything because they're Canadian Tire and they're brilliant. But it's not necessarily like sending a person to land on Mars. Because there's talent out there you can buy, you can do things in partnership. Other countries have proven it's possible. Other institutions in Canada have proven it's possible. So, all right, it's possible. Now, even though we can say it's possible, some other people say, okay, it's not necessary. And that's the next question. Is it necessary? And that's the question that we get in terms of the Conference Board of Canada. They take a look at this and they say, in their report, their famous report, they say other countries have got into postal banking and have done very well. What they have to say about postal banking is totally positive in their report. It's worth a read. It's about page 20 or so. And then they say, but in the case of Canada, we already have a developed banking sector. Unlike Switzerland, of course, because they don't have, what do they know about banks? Or France, or Italy, or the UK. No, these other countries that have dramatically expanded their postal banking, they don't know anything about it. They don't have to have admitted that this is a good idea. And so they just say it's a good idea for other countries because they don't have the developed banking system that we have. Well, let's take a look at our banking system. I can see, if those curtains were opened up, I can see a sign there that says cash money. Okay, cash money. Who's cash money? Well, cash money has 120 stores in Canada. It's a payday loan company, right? One of those stores is right there. You can borrow $500 from them. In fact, we all could. We could probably even do it tonight. And go to the casino and turn it into 5,000 and pay them back, and it would be cool. But you can borrow $500 from them, and you will only have to pay back in Nova Scotia within the next 14 days, $610. Not bad, eh? Not bad. In Ontario, though, you would only have to pay $605 back. And in Alberta, you'd have to pay $615. So, Nova Scotia is sort of getting The banking system changed dramatically, became, the private sector banks became much more powerful, not only in terms of the financial reserves, but also politically powerful. So then they put restrictions on the amount of interest that the public savings bank could provide. So basically they drove it out of business by forcing it to have a maximum of, I think it was like $15,000 with your maximum deposit, and also lowering the rate of interest that the postal bank was paying. So it's a classic example of something that was working, that was in the way of private accumulation, so the private banks drove it up. In France, the postal bank, it's very clear. Every citizen is guaranteed the right to have an account and a credit card from the postal bank. They also provide a whole network of counseling to lower income people, and they take these counseling services out into the communities, and they run seminars to make sure that they help people with their financial planning. But not in Canada. So we have this is part of our reality in urban areas. Rural areas, well, today there are 22% less banks, branches, than there were in 1990. Although today there are more than there was 5 years ago. So they've started to open up more branches now. But still there's 22% less. But where are the branches that are being opened? Where are they located? And where are the branches closed? Well, in many cases, the branches that were closed were in rural areas and often in low-income areas in terms of urban cities. The branches that are being opened tend to be in higher traffic areas, big shopping malls, etc., or in areas of greater income. So, okay. Part of that question about is it necessary is, well, do people still go to banks? Can't you do all your banking in a bank machine? And here again, it's interesting because there was a lot of closures. There's now been some openings. And there's also some banks, like the TD Bank, that has 300 banks that are open on Sunday. Well, why would you be opening a bank on Sunday if no one was going into it? It's an interesting thing. So the statistics are interesting about this. Many of us do our simple banking on a machine, but we still go into the bank to buy an RSP or to do a whole range of things that we do. So there still is, as it turns out, a fair bit of traffic inside bank branches. So I think that we could say that that's necessary. It's necessary in many cases in rural areas because there simply are no branches open and people have to travel. And it's necessary in urban areas because we've got to do something about the unbanked part of our population, including especially low-income people. 10% of low-income people don't have bank accounts, and over a third don't have availability to credits. Like New Zealand, the post office would be losing money if it was not for the postal bank that they have. So, so it would be very important that way. It would take off financial pressure. And for society, it would be a good thing. And that, I think, is perhaps the most important thing for us to take away here, is that we don't want simply another place where people can go and make deposits and withdrawals. We want an institution that will have as a mandate one of social inclusion, where we will actually attempt to deal with the problems that people face in this country when it comes to access to financial services. And so, if we think all these things add up to a good idea, and I think they do, we have to figure out how to make this happen. So at the national level of the union, one of the things that the National Executive Board has decided is we're going to have an international postal banking seminar. We're going to bring in people from about 8 countries that have postal banks, and we're going to get a lot more information from them, and we're going to have them do a lot of publicity and public relations things, do media things, go and talk to people on the Hill, parliamentarians, etc., about this, because these people know far more about postal banking than we do. UNI had a conference on postal banking 2 years ago in Luxembourg, and it was fantastic in terms of information exchange. So we want to keep that going. We want to learn a lot more about that. One of the things that we have not yet gone to the National Executive Board, but one of the things we're planning on doing is do a research study that will look at sort of overlaying, take a geographical area, take a province, maybe a province like Newfoundland and Labrador, but I shouldn't really say that because I haven't talked to Jeff Callahan about it yet, and actually overlay that. Take a look at where all the banks are, and take a look at where all the post offices are, and perhaps do the same for a large metropolitan area like the GTA, so we can actually, we can test our claim, that we're making, that in fact there are many communities in this country that have postal facilities but do not have banks. So we want to further this sort of on the policy level and the research level. We also need, though, to make this happen in some other ways in terms of being able to incorporate this whenever you are talking about the issues about the cutbacks in Canada Post. Because the question will always come to you, and it comes all the time. We just met with the mayor of Ottawa, and he said, well, Canada Post is losing a lot of money, isn't it? And Watson is the mayor. He's pretty favorable. He wants to really fight the community mailboxes in Ottawa. But nevertheless, he said that. So we went through the statistics about how we've really only lost money in 1 year, 2011, and that, the $200 million that were lost, more than that were accounted for by the one-time payment of the pay equity complaint and the $63 million in the pension charge that was a one-time issue due to regulations change. Anyway, so we talked about that. But nevertheless, there is a sense out there. There's a sense out there that Canada Post, if it's not already in a financial crisis, is going to be in one. And this is why we need to be able to talk about this, and we need to be able to say, and we need to be able to believe that this is a viable project. We've got some very interesting support recently. The Toronto Star columnist Tom Walkham was really respected, just wrote a fabulous column about the supporting our proposal around postal banking. People like Linda McQuaig, who is a financial writer, ran for the NDP, just barely lost in Toronto Centre, but is a really knowledgeable person. Has written again supporting our postal banking proposals, and people like the John Anderson study. So we're going to continue to build support. We're going to continue to learn more about it. We're going to continue to put more of an emphasis on this. But it's not going to be driven by the national office. It's got to be driven by everyone in this room. And so, and that, I take documents home and I sleep with them under my pillow, but it's not working. It's never worked for me. I keep trying. You have to go through this stuff. You have to take the time to read those 45 pages and get a feel for the arguments, because they're really, really solid. They're really impressive. Right? This is a no-nonsense study. And so we have to do that. And you know, I just wanted to say one last thing in closing. We're up against a tough fight here, right? Like, this is really tough. These guys have announced a really dreadful plan, and they're serious about it. And so there's always a tendency, I think, for people to sort of say, well, you know, are we going to be successful here? And I don't think we have any guarantee of success whatsoever. But we've never had a guarantee of success, and we've had very tough fights before. You know, some of you will remember, and I mentioned it today earlier when I asked Jean-Claude the question. They came out with a very serious business plan in 1987 to close every single corporate retail outlet, including all of the rural ones, except for 11 in the country. And we fought them for 4 years. We delayed them. By the end of it, they closed, I think, about 1,800 out of about 10,000 that existed at the time. But we beat them back enough that after the election, the first thing the Liberals did, is they imposed the moratorium on closures. And they didn't do it because they like us. They did in large part because they had the NDP and the unions and the communities breathing down their throat and forced them to do it. But we did it, and we did it with our allies. And it was a tremendous effort, and many of you in the room were part of that effort, and I know that, and I respect it. Because that effort was not won in Ottawa. That effort was won on the streets. We had that one post office in Quebec that was occupied by the residents of the town for more than 3 weeks. They wouldn't let it close. And then you recall after that, 1989, first day, remember we had the merger vote? How many people were in the LCUC at one time? Okay. And the rest of you were in CUPW or not in yet at all? Okay. So we had a lot of conflict. We had a merger vote. The day after the merger vote, Canada Post announced that they were contracting out all the parcel delivery. And within 90 days, they had contracted out all of the first class parcels. And we said we were never going to agree to this. We were going to keep fighting to bring it in. And in the year 2000, we negotiated a contract, as you recall, where we forced them to do a pilot project. We picked Winnipeg. We contracted in the parcels. We were able to demonstrate to them that, in fact, it was cost effective and more quality effective to bring them in. And in 2000, the rest of the parcels came back. Nothing happens overnight. There's not going to be any, and there never has been for us, any quick victories here. It's slogging it out. It's you know, as people said earlier today, it's one person at a time. It's one signature on a petition at a time. It's all this. But one thing we can't do is we can't ever stop. So this is part of this. It's only part of this, but it's an important part, and I'd ask you please to very seriously look at the issues and get behind this part of our campaign. Thank you very much.
Because I know that, you know, one of the proposals in the 5-point plan is to drastically increase postage rates, and lo and behold, the business community was against it, and they hadn't thought about the rest. But I know that postage rate increases have been kept below the rate of inflation for a number of years. But I don't know exactly the percentage that it was held, and I believe it's like a order in council or whatever. So they go up every year, less than the rate of inflation, and I'm wondering about for how long that's been in effect, because we've lost a lot of revenue in terms of revenue that goes towards operating the monopoly product, first class water.
It's a very good question, because postal rates have not gone up as much as inflation since the Crown Corporation was formed. And here's sort of the way it works. At the very beginning, there was a big postal increase in 1981. It went up from 17 cents to 30 cents. Bang. Ooh, that was pretty heavy. The plan was after that for it to go to 36 cents the next year. And Trudeau in 1982 brought in the 6 and 5% wage guidelines. So as a result, they had to keep postal rates down to only a 6% increase. So instead of going to 36 cents, it went to 32 cents. Then you had a number of years where basically postal rate increases matched inflation. 5 years to break even originally, then they extended it to 6. So you're going from a $800 million deficit to breaking even in 6 years with very little postal rate increases. So 1989 it breaks even. What happens? The finance minister, the Tory finance minister, Michael Wilson, decides that as a gift to the large volume mailers, he's going to impose 2 years with no rate increase, and he does that. Right? The whole thing was to keep the pressure on us, because once Canada Post broke even, all of a sudden we had all sorts of arguments to say, great, it's making a profit now. It doesn't have a mandate to make a profit. It has a mandate to break even. Let's use all this new money to improve services. So, woof, right away, he imposes 2 years without a price increase, because they sort of like to keep a bit of a crisis. After that, they then reach an agreement between Canada Post and the government that postal rate increases are going to be kept at 2/3 of the rate of inflation. So it's insane. General costs are going up, transportation costs are going up, right? Fuel costs, facility costs are all going up, but postal rates can only go up 2/3 of what everyone else, all the other cost structures going up. So that's in part how they kept the pressure on us. 3 years ago, actually just before she left, Moya Green got the authorization to break that and to actually increase rates a little bit more than inflation. So we've had, in the last few years, rate increases more than inflation, not much. But overall, there's been about a 20% differential of the rate of inflation compared to the rate of postal rate increases. So it's really, you just think of Canada Post. I know that we're all really, and we have issues right now with what's happening, but this is a corporation that is, thanks to postal workers, in large part, has managed, right, to have the most incredible productivity increases so that we could actually produce 18 years, with one exception, of profits while not raising our prices as much as everyone else. It's an amazing. That's true for us now. So we can, if we make profits in the banking service, we can use those to subsidize, let's say, what could be a money-losing letter delivery service, because we don't have competition. But if we were deregulated and there was competition in the letter side, then we'd be going up against competition law by subsidizing the banking. So what you have in New Zealand is exactly this right now. Because they've been deregulated, right? The private sector competitors are arguing that they cannot use the profits from the bank to subsidize the losses that they're incurring in their letters. So all the more reason to not only fight privatization, but we have to make sure always that we fight any attempt to weaken the monopoly on letter mail.
I'm not a member of cupw, but I feel like I've always appreciated the forward-thinking kind of morals that the union embraces. Some of those particularly are where it chooses to invest its money. One of the things I don't like about banks is that they'll just invest anywhere. And I really do appreciate the fact, like, going out and finding banks where there are no banks. For the unbanked as well. Any chance that CPW would be pushing this bank or trying to hold it accountable in terms of where it begins to invest its money? Like, we're going to be finding Canada Post Bank just morally corrupt as, Scotiabank?
If the board of directors of Canada Post has their way, you can be sure that Canada Post Postal Bank will be at least as morally corrupt as the Scotia Bank, if not leading the way. But this is where the whole question about the mandate becomes central. Right? The New Zealand Postal Bank, for instance, part of its mandate is to ensure that Aboriginal people can get mortgages. Right? And if you look at various postal banks, the Brazilian Postal Bank, where do they put most of their loans? Into microfinancing in Brazilian communities. So it will depend on the mandate, but first we have to get to that stage. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Geoff and Tony for the opportunity to be here this weekend, and just say that your region has always played such an incredibly important role in terms of the union, in terms of policy, in terms of driving the politics around our union. And it's really heartwarming for me anyway to see that it looks like this is going to continue. So thanks a lot.
So there's no one else at the mic, so I want to thank Geoff for his presentation. I think we're all a little bit more up to speed on what postal banking is, and to hear that, hey, when you read that document, you'll see that this isn't something new to Canada. It was something that we had, from 1868 until 1968, basically, right? So we're asking that people give that document a good read. There is going to be another report that's going to be released sometime in March, specifically dealing with postal banking in the province of Quebec. And I know some other parts of the country. I know there's different groups that are looking at postal banking in the northern part of Canada as well, an isolated post, and what that would look like for those communities as well. So it's something that we're putting a lot of muster in. We want to make sure that our people are up to date on it, that they have a better understanding of what we're talking about. So when we're out and we're talking to our allies, we're talking to our municipal leaders and our MPs, that we're really talking about that Canada Post has options. It's not about cutting back and cutting back. It's a vicious circle that will end to the demise of Canada Post. We have to break that cycle of spiraling less and less services, and one of those key fundamental things for Canada Post to do is to bring in additional revenues, like CPW has been pushing for quite some time, like introducing things like postal banking, like introducing some more projects around parcel delivery. We implemented one, a test pilot over the holidays in the Greater Toronto area, where people could go online and order parcels by 11 o'clock, and those parcels would be delivered by CPW by 5 o'clock that night. So hey, it's something that Canada Post should be looking at. So there are options for Canada Post, and but we need to really spread that out. It can't just be coming from postal workers. It has to be a broader push. So I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening, and for listening to us and taking part in this presentation. Thanks very much. Oh, just before you go, there's for those from the community, there's a lot of good information out on the table outside. I encourage you to take it with you, and like I say, there's going to be lots of meetings like this that'll be going on in communities right across Atlantic Canada, right across the country over the coming months. So I encourage you to spread the word. Thanks so much.
How long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by, in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. That's a lie. Now, Joe Hill was executed by the state of Utah November 19th, 1915, for writing songs like this. But he left them to us. These are our people's songs, so you damn well ought to learn how to sing it, don't you think?